JC 24/7.
I'm reading a very interesting book here from Lamar Boschman entitled The Rebirth of Music, where he identifies some of the positive effects that music can have on the person. For instance, music can relieve nerve tension. It can restore a mind when it is fatigued. Music is said to even reverse sickness. Some hospitals use music to even cure arthritis, spastic paralysis, and restoring a heart that is fatigued. And I'm sure the list goes on and on and on. Today we continue our discussion on music, culture, and the Christian. And once again, I have invited the same panelists to help us in this discussion. Junelette, I want to start with you first, maybe to give some perspective, because if music has some positive effects upon the man, I would imagine that gospel music must be one of those genres. What is gospel music?
Thanks for having me back. Gospel music, in my humble view, would be music with that message that speaks about our God, that person that we serve.
Sure.
There are different aspects of those gospel music. It will be a message.
Sure.
Definitely will be a message with a purpose, and that message will speak about that Christ, spreading that word. He said, go into all the word and preach. Well, there are some folks who would preach, and then some folks who would give their word in song.
Okay.
And I think that is what, in a nutshell, what gospel music.
Would you include instrumental music as part of that?
Yeah, that has its place. Instrumental music. I know there are some people, as a matter of fact, I would think that some people feel as though gospel instrumental music actually puts them in that place closest to heaven.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, you just. Well, I guess what genre it might be. Well, I know we'll reach there at some point. But yeah, okay. I think there's a place for that. But there is definitely, where that is concerned, it's a bit tricky,
right?
Because gospel music should really have that message. But most of the time, what you would see is that you would have instrumental versions of a particular song.
Right.
So even though you may not you may know Donnie McClurkin's Stand.
Right.
If a saxophonist plays it,
right,
you go along and you sing with it, and it blesses you nonetheless, and you stand.
And you stand.
Yeah. So that's
Lamar did identify some of the positive effects that music has on the body. What are some of the negative effects? Do you know of any negative reaction that music may have?
In my studies, we've bounced up on some studies that shows that some forms of music actually puts you. Doc alluded to it some time ago. It could uplift or it could pull down. Mm-hmm. There are some very depressing songs out there, and it was actually written with that in mind. What we like to call tabanka. You have that. You go down.
Over there, sir?
There's a point in your life where we've all gone through our stages,
Okay.
But the reality is, I think some music could be very, it could put you in a state of depression.
Okay.
Some songs, I remember as I was saying in our studies, we would have shown where someone who would have listened to a very strong heavy metal music over and over and over almost went crazy.
Okay.
Because it would have played on their mind in some way, and it just takes you there. But music, as I said, it's sensory stuff you deal with.
And then the drums and stuff like that we talk about.
Right. So you have different. That's right. It puts you in there. So they are good, and they would be good, and they would be.
Doc, I'm sure you have been asked this time and time again.
Okay, let's go to one of the elements of music.
Sure.
Which is the element of rhythm. Now, we are all rhythmic creatures.
Some more rhythmic than others.
Yes, but before even dealing with the more or less rhythmic, we have a heart.
I hear you.
And the heart beats rhythmically.
Come on now.
We breathe.
That's right.
That's rhythmic.
Right.
We have pulse.
Okay.
We walk.
Mm-hmm.
Our hands move. Right. These are all natural rhythmic elements.
Good.
Now, music has rhythm.
Good.
Music, rhythm is the fuel of music.
Okay.
And all music has rhythm.
Right.
Now, our natural rhythms and the rhythms of music can coincide or otherwise. And to the extent to which they differ, it creates different responses.
Right.
And lots of these elements of tension and stress are because of the incongruity between the natural rhythm and the other rhythm.
Right.
Okay? Now, let's go to a biblical situation. Remember Saul and David?
Right.
And the effect that music had in calming Saul down? First instance of music therapy that I'm aware of. But the Greeks also had some theories on that.
Right.
There's the ethos doctrine relating to the effects that music has on the human organism.
Okay.
So that recognizing that element, that music, part that music plays,
Right.
that's why rhythm, is such a potent force
Right.
in eliciting the response that we want to get. Now, let me place it again in this larger perspective. I may be repeating myself, but I feel it, and I believe it.
All right.
Music is a force, element in the hands of God or the devil to produce a certain reaction
Good.
and a certain response.
Right.
And we've got to observe that. Now, we are different.
Sure.
A very simple illustration, non-musical.
Right.
If I say the word top, we'll probably get different responses.
Right.
Same word,
Uh-huh.
but based on association, background, we'll come up with different. Similarly, in the area of music,
Right.
the factors that have shaped my musical experience may not be Eldon's or Junior or someone else's. And I've got to understand that. To me, there's a certain range. Now, I prefer some things. It doesn't mean that what someone else prefers is wrong.
Good.
Doesn't mean that at all.
Good.
The preference may be based on different things.
Right.
Right? So as we look at it, we've got to, and as we grow in understanding,
Right. And therefore, our preferences must not be used as blueprint.
definitely not.
As a template for how
Definitely not.
all should be governed. While you're speaking, Doctor, I'm thinking of, I grew up being exposed to all different types of gospel music, one of which would have been country western. You have country western, you have classical, or what people call classical you have rock, gospel rock, gospel R&B and stuff like that. Is there a place for gospel calypso?
All right. And I may appear to be avoiding your question,
That's all right.
but let me illustrate it with an experience of mine, and it's not gospel calypso. But it illustrates the point that one can be influenced differently by the same thing, or something to which you may not have been that closely associated. I make no apologies for this, but Mahalia Jackson was not one of my favorite singers.
Okay.
But I had an experience a number of years ago that brought her very close to me. It was when I was president of CUC, and I had, quote unquote, a bad day that day. And I got home, went into my bedroom, turned on the radio, and I heard Mahalia Jackson singing, "He's got the whole world
Come on now.
in his hand."
Come on now.
And I listened to the lyrics. And it was a totally different experience to me as a result of
I hear you.
what I was experiencing
At
at
the
that
time.
particular
Okay.
point. I am not going to be law and testimony for anybody. What may impress someone based on these many variables that may be in their life, I can't legislate.
Sure.
By the same token, however, I'm always on guard, recognizing that
Sure.
what's there,
Sure.
how the devil might be using.
Which applies to any genre.
That's correct.
Good.
My last illustration,
Sure.
you alluded to it when you were chatting off air. Remember Nebuchadnezzar and the image
Yes,
on the
image,
plane?
that's right.
Image?
Right.
And he assembled people from all over to worship your word again. Worship.
Worship.
And what was the element he used to get them?
Music.
Music. To bow down.
Right.
And 3 young fellas did not bow down. That's a whole sermon there, but I'm not in a preaching mode.
Come on now. Well, if I recall, Ellen was sitting where you were sitting last week. And he put on his pastor's mantle. Ellen, are you on the same page with Doc in this regard? Take your time.
I am. And to go on some of what Doc was saying before, there's always that element of association that goes along with the music. The element of, again, preference and that self-expression, which in itself is something that I wonder if that has any place in the worship.
Sure.
And if self-expression does have a place, then how much is enough and how much is too much? When we enter, church or wherever and to worship, is it how much of it is about us and
Right.
how much I prefer,
Right,
as
okay,
opposed to worship to God and giving God what He asks of us.
Okay.
Am I going to use what you're asking, calypso? Am I going to use that in my worship or in the church service as a form of worship because I think it meshes with the gospel story, gospel music, or am I using it because I just want to whip up the crowd into a frenzy and get everybody to be moving together? And,
That's right.
What's the purpose of it?
Right.
And then the other thing is back to how powerful music is. If you, again, this season that we're in, Dr. Andrews said before, this probably was off air, you have everything. Have the costumes, you have the trucks, you have the people, and no music. Well, how much carnival do you have? Am I using music in church in the same way?
Right.
Or, am I trying to get people to feel something without having them think about what they're doing?
Okay.
Does that fit with the gospel? Because Jesus did it all the time. He'd have a following. He'd have throngs of people following him. And he'd always stop them and say, especially when it came to making disciples, hold on, why are you following me? Have you thought about what you're doing? Because this is what it means. If we're in church and the music or whatever we're doing in church doesn't do that, is that in line with the gospel, or is that taking us away from the gospel? Are we trying to draw people to something without having them think about it, or are we just trying to be entertained, or are we just trying to work up a sweat? So all those things are things I think about with respect to gospel calypso or any other kind of version of gospel that we have.
Doc, I want to sort of piggyback on something you spoke about with respect to Nebuchadnezzar and the image on Dura. Let me just ask you this. How effective you think it would have been if Nebuchadnezzar did not employ music for his own gain to ensure that they worship the image?
Well, I would have to eisegeize here a little bit.
That's all right.
But, there could have been a practical aspect in that he had crowds out there. We're not told the number, but there were not 200 persons there. There were many more than that, I'm sure. Okay? So he had to have something that they would all hear, right? And music is, with all those instruments, we are told that were there.
Sure.
That was quite a band.
This was
right?
a band. It was a large
So when they struck up, everybody could have heard it. Okay, so that's one factor. But I also think that the culture probably played a part there. It was probably music that they were accustomed to and hearing in their setting to create that type of response. And bear in mind, his essential objective was that they worship the image.
Good.
And of course, what did the image represent? We don't want to go down the theology of it, but we know that the image did not conform to the dream.
Right.
and the direction that was taking.
Good.
Now, we are all also creatures of worship. We all have to worship
Right.
someone or something.
Okay.
It's in us.
Right.
All right? We worship a sports figure or an entertainment figure. It's there.
Right.
And the play on that desire to worship
I hear you.
could be used
I hear you.
so many. So I make that point to let us realize, and I don't think many of us realize, how many things are operating
Good.
in this sphere of worship and music and what have
I
you.
tell you.
So that what I find in many instances, we like something. And it's very easy to like because the
That's
nature
right.
of it.
That's right.
And we go with the flow because we like it.
Right.
But now, as Eldon was saying, have we given it deeper thought
That's right. That's right.
in the particular?
Junior, and to borrow a musical term, if you were to transpose that experience on Plain of Dura to our time, and I'm using deliberately the carnival setting, where music is used maybe loosely in a form of worship, because a lot of folk respond to the artist. Put your hand in the air, jump up, and they follow suit. Do you think that that is one of the enemy's tactics to get people to worship him?
I guess it could very well be. It could very well be because there are different elements in music that as I say, it plays on your mind and you follow suit and the music itself is very powerful. So all those elements that are a part of it, I think it could very well be used by the enemy. I mean, the enemy could use a whole lot of different means. He knows music
Right.
not to science, and I feel as though that it can be. In the flip side, I think that we could understand that by nature we again with culture,
Right.
there's something that sits inside of us that wants us to do certain things.
Right.
So it's a play. We have to be very careful. We have to be very mindful.
Of course, if you look at Carnival today, as opposed to what happened last 20 decades ago, some of the music encourages you to strip,
Right.
to
So
come
it's
naked.
So now it's definitely a follow me kind of influence, and
Right.
and anybody, and that's a scary thing. Anybody who has any kind of ideology, anybody who has any kind of preference, could lead you to do anything.
Right.
I remember seeing a particular, because of I would analyze a number of things, and I remember seeing a particular performer at one point in time, a secular guy, in a carnival, in a setting. I was looking at the video, and he was in his element. He was almost, I was like looking at his facial expression, and he was serious about what he was doing. And I remember he said, there was a part in his song that says, outer body, come out of your body. Now, I remember seeing this, and I was amazed by it because somebody brought it to my attention. I was looking at it.
In Trinidad?
In Trinidad.
Okay.
And this man, a prevalent soca artist, he said, I want you to stand up. Everybody just stand at attention. Just stand up. No move, no hand there, no jumping, no nothing. Just stand up, just stand up. Feel the rhythm. And I want you to come out of yourself, watch yourself next day like this, and then come back in your body. And I'm saying, I'm thinking that, like, whoa. And people actually stood like this, almost as if they were actually seeing themselves an outer body experience. And I'm saying, that is how powerful.
And the music was playing.
Yeah.
Try to imagine that same thing, that same command being given with no music. Would he have accomplished the same thing?
I don't think it would be the same way.
Right.
I think it puts you in that zone. It already puts you there. Doc was talking about that rhythm, and there are things that are very natural to us. So that in itself would have just been infectious. And at that point in time, there was no melodic line running. There was nothing other than an infectious rhythm. Very infectious rhythm.
Right.
So that's what was being done, So, yeah.
It's almost like you're programmed to respond.
Yeah.
Let me make a simple point.
Sure.
Music has the power to turn this off.
You're conscious.
Conscious mind.
Okay.
And you're not operating from this at all. It's totally.
And that's one of the reasons why music in the gym sounds different from.
That's right.
I don't know about you, but if I'm exercising I'm not going to put on a Mighty Fortresses or God.
Except with a different.
Unless it has some other kind of beat going with
Right.
it. I mean, because that's how music is. That's how the body responds to music. So you chip behind the truck from Golconda to Mount Hope.
Like you did it before, sir.
I tried.
There you go. Yeah.
But and then the music
You don't
goes
feel
off,
anything,
and then
that's
you
right.
wonder, well, how am I getting home now? Well, you probably have to put the music back on to get back home.
That's right.
But music, you do things with music going that you don't realize. That's why the slaves sang the way they did. That's why, exercise works the way it does and aerobics works the way it does, because the music helps you to
You're
get
very
through
right.
that.
I asked some people who play mass all the time. I said, if you were supposed to not get a taxi downtown by Citygate, would you walk to Long Circular Mall? And it's like, no. I said, but you do that normal on Carnival Monday and Tuesday. Because that music is just inside. You're not going to just do it outside of that.
Right.
So there are elements. You're very right.
Sorry, which is, and no, that's dealing with Carnival, no, in church.
Well,
Here's where I start to raise my eyebrow sometimes. We have crusade, preach up a sermon, preach up a storm. Then we have altar call.
have mercy.
We have music.
Man.
And sometimes I sit and I wonder, no, are these people coming forward
Of
because
the music.
they've gone through the thought process of Jesus is calling me, here's what he's calling me
puts you in that
for.
mode.
Am I really in with this? Or am I going forward because just as I am is pulling me forward?
Oh, no.
Now that's
And then somebody might question, is it wrong to go because of that?
questions.
Good-
But
good
these are
observation
discussions
you're
that
making.
we need to have,
Yeah.
and then things that we need to think about.
Yeah. Thanks for
Because
speaking to the preachers. Eh?
because worship, there is an emotional part to worship.
Definitely.
I mean, we can't get away from it. There is an emotional part.
We are emotion creatures. That's right.
But then again, it comes back to where Doc was leading us, or had us before. Balance.
Right.
Is it all emotional, or is it all, thought, or is it, how
And
do
you
we
did
get
allude
these
to the
things?
fact of switching off your conscience.
Right.
And your
So
emotional.
how do we get these things all in balance? That's
Doc, you wanted to say something?
Just to be, what Eleanor said, and cap it off. I have been on platforms several times.
Sure.
A sermon being delivered, and the preacher is about to make an altar call. And he has an appropriate soloist, whatever, and music comes in. And if it is well done, and I've seen it, there is a change in the feeling and the reaction of the congregation right away. So you see, music has
right.
the power,
Okay.
right? And it has a value in that setting as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
Now, it could, as everything else,
Sure.
things could be overdone.
That's right.
But I've seen it,
Good.
seen it. And it's the subconscious comes into play.
Okay.
What's the purpose of the Levites?
Oh, yeah.
Setting
Right.
the table, basically.
All right, there you go. While you're on that, Doc, why you think God created music? I don't know. What was in the mind of God? Because music is everywhere, and God
yeah.
must have, allowed it to be a part of His whole creation story. Why?
Well, I could give two answers to that. We are told by a certain author that God gave us music to serve a holy purpose.
Okay.
But beyond that, or as an extension of that, and I may have used the word before, music is a lubricant. It serves many of the purposes to which you referred earlier on.
Okay.
Now, we cannot go through a day without experiencing music.
All right.
It is recognized in the commercial world, whatever world, we buy more, whatever, because music affects us and we respond to music.
Okay.
And it's a necessary aspect of it.
Junior, do you believe it's going to be one of the devil's last day tools?
I think it is.
See that
But-
he was a musician.
I think it is.
a
I think it is
musician.
one of them. I think it's one. I've always said that. I think too that it may not even be in the way that we may think it's going to happen, because we may think, well, you know what, in the last day, you're going to use the music to pull the young people outside of the church and all that. I don't even think it's in that way. I think he's going to use it in one of the ways he's going to use it is basically even dividing the very people that listen to the music in the church, within the church. So the argument would comes up, oh God, this kind of music or that kind of music can pull you all so much apart, and I can't agree with Dr. Andrews. I just can't take Dr. Andrews because he has a stance, or he has a view. And I think it breaks it down so much because it's such a very contentious, just as religion.
That's right.
You know, it's such, so I think he's going to use it. And the devil is a clever dude. The good news is that he's defeated already.
Right, okay.
But the reality is that he's very clever. And if you're not grounded, you're going to be swayed.
Okay.
An article I wrote way back in 1970.
Wow.
When the Black Power movement.
Wow.
You weren't born yet, Junior.
No.
The Black Power movement had just come on the scene. And we became very conscious. The steel band was beginning to come into the church. And there were many who were very much opposed to it. And Pastor Dutton was a young leader in Stanmore at the time, and the young people, they borrowed a magazine. And they asked me to write something on the steel band. I'm not going to go through the article, but I remember my punchline at the end. For the sake of steel band, don't break up the church. And which is because the devil could use us too.
I hear you.
Because there's someone on that side, someone on that side.
Very right. Very right.
Ellen, we have about less than a minute to wrap up. And I think we could safely say we all agree that music is highly subjective. Our choices of music is highly subjective or highly subjective. But there must be some guidelines because I can't just leave it up to you to decide what you want to listen to, especially if Junior is correct that the enemy is going to be using music as a last day tool. How do you go about helping a young person to make the right choice? Do you have any recommendation of various types of music which are, in your mind, safe? Apostle Paul did say, and I think it was in Ephesians 5, that you must praise God in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. What are these spiritual songs you want to advise?
How to answer that in less than a minute?
I do apologize.
If you think about it this way, this might help. If I listen to a certain kind of music all week long, and it's not the kind of music I am going to hear in church, after a while I might have a little difficulty appreciating or identifying what I hear in church. Now this is assuming a lot of things. It's assuming that you hear what you're supposed to hear in church.
All right.
It's assuming that there is, something that you're not supposed to hear in church that you would hear outside when you're not in church. But really and truly, as was alluded to before, there is that something inside all of us that whether we want to admit it or not, tells us this is right and this is wrong. This might not be so right. I don't think this is where I should be going with this. Okay. And most of the time we try to explain it away. We try to go down the line of self-expression because now we're in this postmodern age and everybody's into individualism and whether does this feel good for me and this is my relationship with God and all those things. And like you said, music is really subjective. But really and truly, if you have, again, go back to the relationship with God, if you have that relationship with God, and you're really serious about it and you're really, diligent about it and seeking his face, you'll know what will work and what won't work. Okay. And if it doesn't bring you closer to God, then it's obviously taking you away.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know we are just on the iceberg. There's much more we can discuss. But I think what we have said would have been at least a stimulus for people to look at music from a different perspective. I will leave with you a counsel that is written or inscribed in the Word of God, Philippians 4:8. Finally, my brethren, whatsoever things are true, honest, just, pure, whatsoever things are lovely and whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any praise, if there be any virtue, let your mind dwell on these things. That should help you in your choice of not only music, but anything you do for the honor and glory of God. Thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to having you again on JC 24/7. Thank you, Pastor.